So back to the helpline. I know one of the questions or comments that comes up right here is like, well, why doesn't a bishop just like call and report? They learn about abuse no matter who they learn it from. Like they shouldn't care. They should just like call and report that. And there's a kind of logic to that. I get it. The helpline is there for more than just that very, very cut and dry, super crystal clear case, though. Laws in every state are different, and shockingly, laws within states are often really confusing. I'm going to give you an example. This is for the state of Utah. There are contradictions like this probably in every other state, in many that I looked at least. Pretend that you're a bishop for a moment. And on one Sunday, you meet with people and you hear about two cases, okay? One is two 13-year-olds in your ward they've been seeing each other, they've been trying to be dating, and they have engaged in sexual touching with each other. So that's case one. Case two, a 16-year-old girl in your ward, you find out that she is having sexual relations with a 22-year-old man. And if I were to ask you which one is a crime, almost everyone that I put this question to said, easy, that's number two. A 16-year-old is still a child. A 22-year-old is a man. That is illegal. That deserves to be reported. Except that in the state of Utah, that's legal. And in the state of Utah, no one is allowed to have sexual contact with a 13-year-old, even another 13-year-old. It's a misdemeanor. They're not going to get thrown in prison over this, but it's actually against the law for even two 13-year-olds to be doing that with each other. Now, what bishop in the world is going to know that? Probably not many. The next claim is about the helpline. Now, we've talked about that a little bit already. The claim is that the helpline is there to keep the church out of legal trouble. So what actually is this helpline? So it was created in 1995 as a response to kind of greater awareness about sexual abuse. Believe it or not, before 1995, there's a lot of places that had no mandatory reporting laws at all. And there was sort of still this lingering belief that abuse had more to do with stranger danger than it did with a person who was in that child's life for legitimate reasons and could build trust with them. Many people still sort of had the idea of, oh, I've taught my kids not to talk to strangers, therefore they're safe. And around 1995, really like 1992 to 1998, a lot of states start changing their laws to move towards mandatory reporting, to move towards making reporting easier, even where in places where it's not mandated. They start changing the messaging to children about it's more than just stranger danger. So the fact that this happens in 1995 absolutely goes on with the culture that was happening in the broader United States at the time. It has come into public view in the last couple of years, this case in Bisbee, that the helpline is a thing. So what is the helpline? Helpline is a phone number that is available to bishops, stake presidents, branch presidents, other kinds of leaders around the world that they can call and find out, how do I fulfill my legal responsibilities now that I know this information? They also can find out things like, how do I help this family? What do I need to do here? The claim is the bishops in Bisbee, Arizona, called the helpline. The helpline said to them some version of, don't you dare report this. It will be bad for the church's image. You can't do anything. That's the claim this podcast makes. That is not exactly what happened with the helpline or what happened at all. There's two bishops in this case. They switch over sometime during the middle of it. And the first one, his name is John Herod. John was bishop, and he finds out from this man who was the abuser. I don't even like to use his name anymore. The man who was the abuser, that a one-time incident had happened and that it was in the past. This man and his wife informed the bishop that he isn't going to be living in the house anymore. He isn't going to have unsupervised access to the children. The bishop is in a really very strange situation here because he is hearing this firsthand from the man who did it, meaning it meets the criteria for this being a confession. If he had heard this information from a victim, had heard it from someone else, is not a confession, but he hears it directly from the man saying it. So there are different rules that he has to follow as part of our religion, as part of all religions. Confession is treated as something that's sacred, but not in the sense that the media makes it out to be. They make this out to be, oh yeah, an abuser gets to go talk to the bishop. The bishop tells him, oh, everything's fine. You're forgiven. Don't worry about it. Meanwhile, he goes home and abuses his kids some more. The bishop at that time, he pleads with the couple, would you please make contact with the police? I can't do that on your behalf in this scenario, but you absolutely need to be doing this. The man who's committed the abuse refuses, and maybe that's not surprising. What is surprising is that the mother refuses. The mother not only knows that this is happening, but she's covering for him. She leads the bishop to believe that her husband isn't going to have any access to the kids. Whereas that's not the case at all. She completely covers for him and sets up a scenario where the bishop believes that the kids are safe now, and they're not. Mom holds the responsibility here. That mother actually, she had a criminal trial. She has served jail time on this. The question that she covered for her husband made it able for him to be able to do these kinds of things it's not up for debate. The courts have already ruled on that. She's served her time and she is out of prison at this point. But she's the one who is responsible right here. The second bishop, he says the same thing, but it's a little bit different. He takes over as bishop after a couple of years. He gives a sworn declaration to the court, and I'm going to quote for you this file. Any of the other court documents I cite as well. You can find links to them all in the footnotes. They're also readily available online. You could read them for yourself. This is from his declaration. I'm starting at line 17. He says, I did not know that Paul Adams was abusing his children while I was bishop until he was arrested in 2017. The communications with me were about a past one-time incident, and then other things that have to do with this man's excommunication. I did not know until he was arrested in 2017 that he had abused the plaintiffs, the two daughters. I did not know until he was arrested that he had viewed or disseminated child pornography, including videos of his own children. So the claim that this guy knew and wasn't doing a thing just does not hold water. He found out that this man was abusing his children the same way that you did when you read it in the news. The heartbreak of the fact that this family had at one time been attending their ward, I'm sure was incredible on him. By the time he's bishop, the father was no longer attending the ward. He had barely been attending it even when the first bishop was there and he had made this confession. The man was not very active in the church. He had been ordained to the Aaronic priesthood and no further. He'd never been through the temple. He didn't serve a mission. He held no calling in the church. He had no leadership positions. He was essentially a guy who occasionally came to church. So the idea that the Helpline is there to defend a guy like that, someone who's so far on the periphery of the church that the church would risk its reputation to defend someone like him, it doesn't make any sense. He maybe spends less than 5 hours in the church building, even when he is active. He goes like when his kids sing in primary. And that's pretty much the extent of his involvement. So why would the church say, oh yeah, we have to kind of lock ranks and really defend this guy? The biggest, most sensationalized article that came out about Bisbee is written by a very good reporter who has written on this topic a lot. I actually have great respect for some of his work in other areas, ironically. It comes out in the Associated Press. And here's the mistake that he makes. We talked about this earlier, even with this Heaven's Help podcast. You can see little spots where they don't understand how our church works. At one point, they say that taking the sacrament weekly, you have to go to the temple to be able to do that. You have to have a temple recommend to be able to take the sacrament, right? Like just a little hint that they don't understand what's going on. So in the AP article, this father who barely attends church, he's talked about as an ordained man in the church, as if they're being compared to, say, the Catholic Church, where being an ordained priest, maybe there's one, maybe there's two ordained priests in a giant Catholic congregation. Most men in the Catholic Church are not ordained to anything like men in our church are. There's no understanding. Like, he was ordained to the Aaronic priesthood and then barely did anything after that. That is not a man who's a leader or an influencer in our church, right? The idea that the church would protect him, risk its reputation to protect a guy like that, there's no evidence. It doesn't even make sense. In terms of what the bishops knew, so both bishops eventually know there was a past one-time event. The details of what exactly they knew about that past event are not specified. Both bishops swear in court that they did not know the details of abuse until they read about it in the paper. The accusation that, the bishops just knew and they just sat at home, sat on their hands and didn't care, it's sensational, it's shocking, but it's not true. So back to the helpline. I know one of the questions or comments that comes up right here is like, well, why doesn't a bishop just like call and report? They learn about abuse no matter who they learn it from. Like, they shouldn't care. They should just like call and report that. And there's a kind of logic to that. I get it. The helpline is there for more than just that very, very cut and dry, super crystal clear case, though. Laws in every state are different, and shockingly, laws within states are often really confusing. I'm going to give you an example. This is for the state of Utah. There are contradictions like this probably in every other state, in many that I looked at least. Pretend that you're a bishop for a moment. And on one Sunday, you meet with people and you hear about two cases, okay? One is two 13-year-olds in your ward they've been seeing each other, they've been trying to be dating, and they have engaged in sexual touching with each other. So that's case one. Case two, a 16-year-old girl in your ward, you find out that she is having sexual relations with a 22-year-old man. And if I were to ask you which one is a crime, almost everyone that I put this question to said, easy, that's number two. A 16-year-old is still a child. A 22-year-old is a man. That is illegal. That deserves to be reported, except that in the state of Utah, that's legal. And in the state of Utah, no one is allowed to have sexual contact with a 13-year-old, even another 13-year-old. It's a misdemeanor. They're not going to get thrown in prison over this, but it's actually against the law for even two 13-year-olds to be doing that with each other. Now, what bishop in the world is going to know that? Probably not many. I'll include in the footnotes links to the actual Utah statutes that say this if you want to look it up for yourself. The age of consent in Utah, to make it even further confusing, the age of consent in Utah is 18. So what in the world is a 16-year-old doing, legally allowed to have sex with her 22-year-old boyfriend? And there are provisions in the law that say if an adult is 7 years or less older than a 16 or 17-year-old, it's legal. So the age of consent is 18, sort of, unless you happen to be 16 or 17 and he's, say, roughly 22, then legal, not a crime. So if you're a bishop and you're grappling with really complicated cases like this, wouldn't you like to have someone to call? Maybe someone who is an attorney who could tell you, like, here's what you need to do about this. So the claim is the helpline is just there to keep the church out of legal trouble. It's just there to protect abusers. It's just there because the church wants to protect its reputation. That is not what the evidence suggests. The evidence suggests, well, one, is the helpline there to keep the church out of legal trouble? Absolutely it is. But as I've said before, the way to keep the church out of legal trouble is to follow the law. So the helpline is going to be there and help bishops and others know what they need to do to fulfill their legal responsibilities. To use the Bisbee case to say that the church just covers for abusers at any cost is ridiculous. Why in the world would we be trying to cover for someone who's in the building for 5 hours in a year and is mostly there to see his kids sing on Sunday? It doesn't make any sense. This podcast goes on to claim, well, there's not a number for victims to call. And so therefore, this is really, really bad. And we talked about that earlier, right? The number for victims to call is 911 or 111 in New Zealand. The helpline is not trying to be a victim helpline, right? It's trying to help the helpers. It's trying to help the person who has received this information, the bishop, to know what to do. Most bishops, you know this, are not well versed in. If your bishop happens to be an attorney, he might know some of these things. He might not. If your bishop is a mental health professional or a physician, they might know some of these things. But your bishop's probably a general contractor or an insurance salesman. Wouldn't it be nice if the church was able to provide someone like him some help to understand what you need to do to help the helper? That's what the helpline is. I hope that calms down some of the fears around that.